Hello, and welcome to another episode of How To from the TPS Southern Region at Middle Tennessee State University. Today's topic is how to find primary sources for architecture. So here we go. I always talk about places to start, and one of the places I'm always mentioning in these videos are the research guides. And you can search by subject heading. And if you look under the art and architecture subject heading, you'll find 86 different things that come up. And so most of them are not going to have a lot to do with architecture itself. So I picked the two that I thought were most pertinent towards this, looking at architecture and getting to architecture-based primary sources. So there is one that's called Architecture Collections in the Manuscript Division. And of course, because it's in the manuscript division, it's largely going to be focused on collections that have kind of handwritten documents, letters, correspondence, sketches, records, those kinds of things. So, for instance, Frederick Law Olmsted papers would be housed under there. And so the other research guide that I think will be the most valuable to the general audience is the Architecture, Design, and Engineering Collections in the Library of Congress Prints and Photographs Division. So because that's in the Prints and Photographs Division, that's going to have more of your illustrations and more professional drawings, as well as all the photographs of different examples of architecture from around the world. And so that is, let's take a look. That's also kind of broken down into different types of collections that to help you do your searches. So, for example, if you want to look at just general thematic collections that are available, you can look at this list here. And, like, for example, if you wanted to look at public libraries, they've got a lot of different resources that they have pulled up on this topic. And look for where it says view digitized content from, and that'll bring you to a gallery of different primary source images, which is probably what you want. All right. So the other place where I usually tell people to start are the digital collections, which of course you can use the left-hand menu to narrow down by topic. And if you go to art and architecture, there are 61 different digital collections. So I have culled that list down into what I think are the ones that are most concentrated on architecture. And then I have divided those into three different chunks. So the ones that largely deal with American architecture, and then ones that depict world architecture, which is good if you're teaching ancient history, medieval history, world history, whatever. And then landscape architecture, because there are a lot of collections that deal with that as well. So, very, very quickly, I'm going to go through this list and give you just a very short summary of what each of these is about. This slideshow is going to be linked in the description box down below, so please feel free to download it. And all of these are hyperlinked, and you can use it to go straight to these places on the library's website. So, to start at the top, the Architecture, Design, and Engineering Drawings collection is mostly drawn from American sources, but also some places in other places in North America as well as Europe. Drawings, illustrations, sketches, notebooks from mostly the 19th into the 20th centuries. A lot of different well-known American architects are represented here. The Carnegie Survey of the Architecture of the South. That was a survey that started in the 1930s, and that goes along with the Frances Benjamin Johnston collection because she was one of the major photographers who contributed to that survey. And more on that later. The Carol Highsmith archive, of course, Carol Highsmith, an American photographer who has been traveling around the country taking pictures of people at their everyday lives, but a lot of it is buildings, landscapes, cityscapes, towns, rural areas, just all sorts of things of interest. And they're beautiful color photographs, all copyright free. And we use a lot of her stuff in all of our materials. More on her later. The Historic American Building Survey slash Historic American Engineering Records slash Historic American Landscape Survey. We will come back to that later. That one is my favorite. The Hurwitz collection, Theodore Hurwitz was a photographer who, in like the early part of the 20th century, largely the 1930s, 40s-ish, took a lot of pictures, mostly around Washington, D.C. So a lot of it is buildings, cityscapes, development of the capital. Very good for that. The Korab collection, that was a photographer who went around and documented the works of Eero Saarinen, who was a Finnish-American architect who was very famous in terms of developing a futuristic modernist style in the mid-20th century. He's responsible for the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, among other things. Beautiful color photographs for that. The Lawrence and Hauswirth collection is great for looking largely in California and the gold mining and other kinds of westward settlement in the 19th century out west. The Montgomery Meigs collection. Meigs was a Union Army engineer who, after the Civil War, became a public works engineer, largely in DC. These are his family papers. The John Margolies Roadside America photograph archive is just what it sounds like, and we will look at that in more detail in a minute. Looking at the world architecture collections, Brumfield was a photographer who went around in the very late 19th, early 20th century and took a lot of pictures across Eurasia looking at the Russian Empire. And he was particularly interested in wooden architecture, so things like stave churches and log buildings and things like that. The Eric and Edith Matson collection. This is from the American colony in Jerusalem, who were basically creating photographs for tourists to the Holy Land in the early 20th century. But it's great for ancient history teachers because there are a lot of photographs of like the Egyptian pyramids, Greek temples, all sorts of ruins of ancient buildings in the Middle East that correspond to a lot of different famous places. The Photochrom prints collection is really nice. These are like postcard quality, tinted images from around the turn of the 20th century. Lots of places around Europe. If you're teaching medieval history, it's good because there's a lot of pictures of things like castles and old bridges and cathedrals and walled cities. And it's just a lot of fun. The Prokudin Gorsky collection, he was another photographer who went around largely the Russian Empire before the USSR and took a lot of photos of different peoples that were part of that empire. And you can also see a lot of cities, towns, and buildings in that collection. Under landscape architecture, America's most famous landscape architect, of course, Frederick Law Olmsted. His papers are in this collection. Olmsted Associates records are papers associated with, his sons and the continuation of his business after him. And so a lot of good notes if you really want to do some research into that firm. Garden and Forest. These are images from a journal of the same name that was focused on horticulture and landscape architecture, largely from the 20th century. Really great gardenscapes and things like that. The Gottschalk Schleissner collection, also a lot of gardenscapes in that. That collection also has a lot of great buildings, as we will see in a moment. Now, you'll notice that I've already also included some story maps and research guides associated with some of these collections. So go there first because that's a really great way to get a sense of what is available and what is most interesting. But there are more story maps that have to do with architecture, and these are four of them that I have highlighted for you here. So the city of Washington also examines the development of Washington, D.C. over the years. This image here depicts the building of the Library of Congress, the Jefferson Building in particular. And it's got like plat maps, so it shows urban development because that is a city that's always been changing over time. Art of Instruction, this focuses on different kind of textbooks from different eras. It has a chapter on architecture in which you can find this image as well as others from a very famous work by Palladio called Four Books of Architecture from the 16th century. He was, of course, very influential on people like Thomas Jefferson and others during the Enlightenment. Perilous Proceedings. This is a fun story map that talks about the development of skyscrapers, which completely changes the cityscape, of course, in places like New York City. This image right here is an illustration of the Flatiron Building, and you can see people interacting with it and fireworks going off, so that their whole attitude to this new kind of urban look. Mid-century Manhattan also focuses on New York City, of course. It's got a lot of pictures of everyday people living their lives, but also the city and how it looks and how it is used, as well as close-ups of different buildings and architectural features. So check those out. But that's a lot of stuff. I have narrowed it down to 5 different collections that I think will be most pertinent to people looking for things in the southern region. And those are the Gottschalk-Schleisner collection. So one thing I like about this collection is it has a lot of exterior shots of buildings as well as interior shots of buildings. So Gottschalk and Schleisner were photographers who were commissioned by different clients to take pictures of different architectural sites. A lot of it, of course, would be showing uh, houses associated with middle and upper class. But and a lot of them, of course, because they're from like the 30s and 40s, are kind of grainy, the photographs are, but you can find a lot of stuff and it's good for also showing like what's still left. The Carnegie Survey of the Architecture of the South. And I have cheated and combined this one with the Frances Johnston collection, even though they are two separate collections, but she was so influential on this survey. And so it is meant to document what is left in the American South during a time when a lot of these buildings are starting to crumble into ruin. And so she fell in love with these buildings and she brought a lot of attention to them and actually was kind of influential in the historic preservation movement too because of her work here. And so she does focus on a lot of buildings of the elites, like plantation houses and things like that. But she also takes pictures of um, outbuildings and buildings that would have been used by everyday people, even marginal people. Over here on the left, you can see a black family standing in front of a dwelling that used to house the enslaved before the Civil War. So let's take a look at this story map real quick, give you a sense of what a story map is set up like at the Library of Congress. So you basically just scroll down. There are different chapters that you can skip to, or you can just scroll down through all of them. And it's great for combining text with images in a way that is like storytelling. And so it talks about her and what she's focusing on, all the kinds of details that she's interested in. And she's looking at buildings that are intact as well as buildings that are in ruin, buildings for living in, buildings for working in. And then she also took some of them, because she's also very interested in gardens, and hired an artist to hand paint the negatives. And so you have these beautiful color transparencies that go with the black and white pictures that she took, which is kind of a really nice touch, but also kind of emphasizes the homes of the elites and not necessarily the homes of everyday people. But it also talks about her a lot, and she's a very interesting person. Here she's saying, you know, I've lain flat on the floor, yes, at 83 years, to get an exact head-on view of a handsomely detailed ceiling. So she sounds like a very interesting woman. So check that one out for the Southern region. Yeah. Now, if you want a more vernacular architecture kind of collection, the John Margolies Roadside America Photograph Archive is for you. This one is not arranged like a normal collection is, so use the research guide and story map to get into it better. The research guide will tell you about him and about what is included in this collection and how to search it. He is not really interested in a lot of the modernist architecture of the 1950s. He is more interested in all these kind of wacky, vernacular kinds of oddball bits of architecture that is left on, you know, everyday landscapes. And so in the 1970s, he just drove around and took a lot of pictures of these structures. And I don't know how many of them are still standing. Some of them might be familiar to you. But there's also this interactive map, which is really great because you can zoom in on your location to see if he took any pictures of structures near you. So for example, like there's some high density pictures in Chattanooga. I believe he took like 74 pictures in this area. So you can go through and see what ones are from each area. Took Ruby Falls, Lookout Mountain. So it's kind of a great way to hop around and see what is close to your neck of the woods. And it's just a really fun collection. All of them are in color, the American style, a lot of kind of popular culture thrown in. And then we have the Carol Highsmith Archive, which beautiful color photographs. Again, this also, her story map includes an interactive map where you can zoom in on a certain location and see if she took pictures there. I particularly like this picture on the left. It is from my hometown of Murfreesboro, Tennessee. It's not the front of the buildings on the square, it's the back of the buildings on the square. And the caption refers to an alley with an unusual number of trash cans. So I thought that was kind of interesting why she would choose to take a picture of that instead of the fronts of the buildings. But you know, this is in use as well. And then over on the right here, we have, of course, Hank Williams' Boyhood Home, which is in Alabama. And I'm really fascinated by this giant awning seeing covering the whole wraparound porch. Very interesting architectural feature. And the last thing I want to share with you today is this collection, which you can just call Habs Hair Hals by its better known acronym. This was a New Deal program started in 1933. It is still ongoing. So the photographs that you will find in here are not necessarily from the 30s. They're from every decade from the 30s on to today. This picture right here of some buildings that were part of the northern side of the public square on Nashville was taken, I think, in like 1971. And those buildings were torn down in 1981. So it was a good thing that they were documented. And of course, documentation was the primary reason behind this collection. Putting to work a bunch of architects and photographers across the country during the Great Depression to document all the things that were left in the landscape, not just buildings, but structures such as bridges and mills and things like that, mining landscapes. And there are a lot of great architectural drawings that have plans, architectural plans, and those are good for teaching like math and science as well. There's some from every single state. So there also, you can search by county. And so you're bound to find something close to where you live. So that wraps up my discussion on architecture primary sources, and I will see you next time.